Hey guys, what's going on? It's Colin here again, back with another engine video. This is actually a video I've wanted to make for quite some time now, but I haven't been able to do it till recently because A, the Fuller & Johnson hasn't been running until recently, and B, I haven't had two Wyco EK mags to run both these engines at the same time until recently. But what I want to go ahead and do in this video is I want to give an overview of what exactly a hit and miss engine is and how it works, and how it compares to a throttle governed engine. Because I feel like a lot of people don't actually fully understand exactly how these things work. So I figured I'd go ahead and give an overview and compare the two engines, and we can fire them up and run them at the same time so you can hear the difference as well. So anyways, I think I'm going to take the camera off the tripod here, and let's take a look. Alright, so what we're looking at right now is my 1928 Fuller & Johnson Model NC. There's the tag, for those of you guys who are curious. And this is a hit and miss engine. So, as you can see, we have two large flywheels, big old piston and rod there. Everything's pretty much out in the open. It's called an open crank hit and miss. Some of the later ones are fully enclosed and you can't see all that. And we take a look in here and see some of the other important parts. So, the way that these work is actually pretty simple. All hit and miss means, or is a very crude way of governing speed. So, I don't know if you can see this, or if you guys picked up on this. This here is our mixer. It's not a carburetor, it's a mixer. All it does is mix a set amount of air with an adjustable amount of fuel to get your right air-fuel mixture for the engine. There is no butterfly in there. It's just a straight tube. If you were to run this and it didn't have any other form of governing system, this would probably run away or rev up to the point where it's starving for either air or fuel. Up here we have our atmospheric intake valve and the push rod exhaust. Gas tank's down here, it works by suction. There's a check valve in there. And over here you can see our push rod for the exhaust, which also has the arm on it that actuates the magneto, which gives our spark. It's water cooled. We have a drip oiler here for our cylinder. Everything else is either manual oil ports like this, which you'd oil with an oil, like a oil can, or we have grease cups here, which you fill with grease and then you twist, and it forces grease down into all these main bearings. Alright, so since it doesn't have a throttle shaft like a more modern engine, how exactly does this thing throttle itself? Or govern itself, I should say. Well, if you take a look in here, you can see right here there's this big weight. If we pull up on this weight, that mechanism there moves. There's like this lobe looking thing here that moves up and down. And that moves that finger up and down. If we spin this up enough to where it's on the exhaust stroke, and we pull this weight out, you can see how that finger down there moves. And there's a little block there. That block is called the latch block, and this finger is called the latch finger. So what happens is as this thing gets up to speed, due to centrifugal force, that weight will fly out, which in turn pulls that lobe up, which in turn pushes this finger down. And if you can see that in there, when this goes down and it's on the exhaust stroke, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this one-handed. Try and spin this over. As you can see, the wheels and the piston and everything are now moving, but the exhaust valve, or the exhaust push rod rather, is being held out beyond the cam. So if you look, our exhaust valve is being held open, which also means that we're getting no spark, and also if that's being held open we have no compression. So that's the key part here. What happens is, as this thing gets up to speed, like I said, that weight will fly out, which through the series of levers, every engine's a little different, this is just how Fuller & Johnson did it. There's always a latch finger, which interfaces with a latch block, which is on your exhaust push rod. And in turn, when it gets up to speed, it holds the exhaust valve open. So if you hold the exhaust valve open, you won't get any compression, you won't have any fuel being sucked in, and you also won't have any spark. So, as a result, the thing coasts. Again, got to try and do this one-handed. coasts just like this, where the only resistance on it is due to the bearings and the piston sliding in and out. Once it slows down enough due to that friction, that weight will come back in, and the cam will bump the valve, or the push rod rather, and usually that finger will come up, and then we come back and we'll do another cycle. Boom, there's your spark, comes back, that gets it back up to speed, that comes back up, and this weight will, the weight will fly out again and hold this finger down. The weight of these flywheels is what keeps this whole thing going. So basically what happens is it basically only fires when it needs to fire. So as a result, you'll hear in a little bit, it kind of, when these things are running, you hear a bang, choo 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 choo, bang, choo choo choo. Because it's only firing every once in a while when it slows down enough that it needs to fire to keep the speed back up. And that's how a hit and miss works. They're pretty simple, and it's a very just crude way of governing speed. But it's also pretty genius if you ask me. And these aren't exactly efficient engines because the compression is super low. These are designed to run on just about anything. But the principle itself is relatively efficient because it really doesn't use that much gas because it's only firing when it needs it. Because this thing will run all day on that tank of gas. So, why did I bring the Witte out? Well, that's because the Witte, despite looking pretty similar to some hit and miss engines, it's not a hit and miss engine. This is a throttle governed engine, and the biggest giveaway of that is this big mixer here. So, throttle governed engines work basically the same way that any modern engine does, like the one in the truck, or these Briggs & Stratton engines, in the sense that we have more of a carburetor here than a mixer. Although it doesn't have any idle circuits, I don't know whether that makes this technically still a mixer. I call it a carburetor because if you can look here, that is a throttle shaft. So the way that this works, this is actually a kerosene engine. So what you do is you start it up on this little tank of gas, let it get nice and hot, and you switch over to the main gas tank there, which has the kerosene in it. That's not that important though. The way that this one works is very much the same in terms of the governing, with the weights flying out. You can see it just looks a little bit different. Here we have these weights here, which you can kind of see they flop around. When this is spinning really fast, these weights fly out. That pushes on this rod here, actuates this. But instead of that holding our exhaust valve open, that just moves a throttle shaft in our carburetor. So that's really just adjusting the amount of air-fuel mix that the engine receives. And that's how this thing governs itself. So you hear when this one runs, it's a very constant bang, 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 because it's hitting every single time. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. We have atmospheric intake valve, push rod exhaust, same magneto for spark. Just very similar build, just slightly different design. Obviously, they're by two different companies, two different horsepowers. Also, I should mention this is a 1923 3-horse Witte. That's a 1928 2-horse Fuller & Johnson. So this one's a touch bigger. But really these both, throttle governed and hit and miss engines came in a big variety of sizes. Anywhere from, I think the smallest ones I've seen are like 0.5 horsepower, all the way up to ginormous, like truck sized and bigger. But yeah, this is actually a touch simpler in the sense that it's a little more modern, where all it uses to govern its speed is this throttle shaft. And there's a butterfly in there, which you can't really see, unfortunately. It's still kind of primitive, and it still uses suction feed, and this is actually a one-way valve in here that you'll hear it buzzing. That helps create the suction to pull the gas through. If you don't have that, it won't run, whereas your modern engines don't exactly have that. But otherwise, these two things are very similar. It's also water-cooled, same thing with the grease caps for lubrication and the oiler for the cylinder. But the way they operate is very, very different. So I think what I'm going to go ahead and do here is let's throw the camera back up on the tripod. We'll fire up the Fuller & Johnson. I'll give you guys a quick overview of that one working. We'll fire up the Witte. I'll show you guys that one work. Alright, so let's go ahead and see if this Fuller & Johnson is going to want to start. The way that you start one of these, or at least the way I start one of these, you got to make sure your timing's retarded so it doesn't kick back on you. I leave this fuel valve open. I stick my thumb up in there, and I'll pull it over until I feel gas, There we go, felt some gas. Give it a little choke to make sure our cylinder oiler is on. And then you just give these wheels a big tug, and usually it will kick off. Just like that. And from there you adjust your fuel mixture and choke until it runs just the way it should. I'm going to let this thing warm up a little bit. It's usually a touch cold-blooded. But once it gets some heat in it, we can adjust the mixture a little bit and it'll run even smoother. Alright, let's take a look at how this thing actually works in operation. Alright, so here we are up close and personal with the Fuller & Johnson. Hopefully you can see all these mechanisms going here. We come around to the side. Sorry, I gotta grab the wire for the camera. It's currently charging as I'm videoing this. But I know you won't be able to see the weight because it's moving around, but you can definitely see the arm moving. You can see it just dropped. You can watch right there. So the weight falls in, the arm falls down, because there's a return spring on it. I don't know if I mentioned it before. And it will come up and it will fire. Forgot to advance my timing. You can see it integrating with the latch block there. This is how the spark mechanism works. Uh-oh. Well, she died out. Let me go ahead and start that back up again for you guys. Well, like I said, she's a little cold-blooded, especially when it's colder out like it is today. But here you go. This advances your spark. You can see how that works. There's our valve. And if you listen to the exhaust pipe here when it's not firing, you can hear the air going in and out as the piston's going in and out. Creates that like breathing sound. But hopefully this gives a good overview of how this thing's supposed to run. Go ahead and shut her down here. So there you go. Let's go ahead and fire up the Witte. Alright, let's go ahead and fire up the Witte. This one's slightly different. You're going to start it on the starting tank here. Open that valve up a little bit. Timing's retarded. Hopefully this thing goes, because this mag is a little bit weak. So sometimes it gives me issues starting. But let's see what happens. I open the main valve, wait until it starts running red. I close off the starting tank. There we go. Normally you would advance the timing, but the timing lever on this is very worn and it doesn't stay advanced. So I run it with the timing retarded. I usually run it slower than this, but this is where the throttle's set at. I don't feel like messing with it right now. So anyways, let's take a look. Well, as you can probably already tell, there is quite a difference between the way that this one runs and the Fuller & Johnson runs. As you can see, the exhaust valve is going every single time. And aside from the slight misfire due to the weak mag, Very different sound out of that exhaust. You can see our mixer here is buzzing away. The reason there's duct tape on there is to provide a little bit of extra suction. It needs it to run pretty well. I think my spring in there might be a touch weak. I have to mess with it. But here you go. You can see everything moving. Unlike last time, there is no latch block to hold the exhaust valve open. You can see that's going every single time. But we have our governor weights spinning around there, which are pushing on this shaft. If I want to rev this engine up, I just move this. Because this is a throttle shaft. That's actually how you adjust the speed, is right here. You increase the spring tension on that throttle plate. That fights with the governor, and that's how it maintains its speed. But there you go, there's the Witte. Let's fire up the Fuller & Johnson at the same time. Oh, here you go, they're both running at the same time. Now you can hopefully tell the difference. I'm going to take you guys off the tripod, we'll walk around. Alright, let's take a look at each in operation here. You know, I should also mention, if this were to stick down, you can see the engine will take off. Which gets exciting real fast, because these things aren't balanced and they will start jumping off the ground. Can't load off that button too early, it wants to keep going. But anyways guys, hopefully this provided a semi-decent explanation about how a hit-and-miss engine works and how it compares to the more modern throttle-governed engine. I always found it interesting that both of these technologies existed at the same time and coexisted for quite some time. But obviously in the end we ended up going with throttle-governed as our main design for most you know, small engines. But Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. If you like what you see, hit the little like and subscribe buttons. I'd appreciate that. By all means, leave a comment if you have one, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.